"This is wrong," said a poor cleaning lady. She noticed the millionaire and saved him $500 without knowing. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, glinting off the polished surfaces, and she noticed tiny fingerprints on the glass that no one else seemed to care about. Most people walked into the office, sat down at their expensive chairs, typed on their computers, and walked out without ever looking closely at anything. But Maria saw the small things: dust, smudges, papers slightly out of order. To her, those little details mattered. She had been a cleaning lady for over 20 years, not because she loved the work, but because it was steady and honest. Every morning, she woke before dawn, kissed her two children sleeping in the small bedroom she shared with them, and stepped out into the chilly streets of her neighborhood. The streets smelled of bread baking in the corner shops, and the faint scent of exhaust from early delivery trucks mixed with the aroma of morning coffee. Maria liked to take a slow walk to work when she could, watching people start their day. She knew their faces, their routines, and sometimes even their moods before they entered the building she cleaned. Maria's life was simple, and she liked it that way. She did not own fancy clothes or cars. Her small apartment was modest, with faded curtains and a living room where the walls had been repainted more times than she could count. She cooked simple meals for her children: rice and vegetables, sometimes lentils, sometimes eggs. Money was always tight, but Maria never let that stop her from smiling or laughing. She knew how to make joy out of little things: a joke, a small gift, a cup of tea on a rainy afternoon. Her children, Sophia and Daniel, loved her dearly. She had raised them almost alone since their father had left years ago. Though it had been hard at first, Maria had grown stronger. She was proud of the values she had instilled in them: honesty, kindness, and responsibility. They knew to work hard, to respect others, and to notice the world around them, just as she did. The office where she worked now was unlike any other she had cleaned before. It was the headquarters of Richard Stone, a billionaire whose name appeared on every news magazine Maria had ever glanced at while waiting for the bus. To her, his office seemed like another world. The floors were so shiny that she could see her reflection when she bent down to scrub them. The walls were decorated with abstract paintings that cost more than her apartment. Plush chairs, polished tables, and rows of neatly arranged documents gave the space an air of power and control. Maria moved carefully, as if stepping lightly would show respect for the place. She knew her job well. She had learned over the years that cleaning was not just about washing floors or dusting shelves. It was about noticing. It was about seeing what others overlooked and making sure everything was right, even if no one would ever say thank you. She felt proud when she did a good job, even if the praise came only from herself. This morning, Maria noticed a folder left on the corner of Richard Stone's desk. It was filled with papers and charts that seemed complicated, full of numbers, graphs, and small print. She didn't understand most of it, but something felt off. One of the pages was sticking out at an angle, the way it shouldn't have been. A tiny stain marked one corner, as if someone had spilled coffee and ignored it. Maria's hands hovered over the folder, almost without thinking. She didn't know what made her pick it up, but she did. Something in her told her to look closely. As she flipped through the pages, she realized that the numbers didn't add up. She wasn't a trained accountant, but she had learned a lot from watching people in offices over the years. Mistakes, she had noticed, often had a pattern: small things ignored until they became bigger problems. And these numbers, she thought, might become a big problem if no one checked them. Maria paused, her heart beating a little faster. Who was she to point out something like this? She was just a cleaning lady. What if she was wrong? What if she embarrassed herself or offended someone important? She put the folder down gently and rubbed her hands together, thinking. But she could not shake the feeling that this was serious. It felt like a responsibility had fallen on her, even if she had not asked for it. She went on cleaning, dusting shelves, wiping down tables and organizing chairs. Her eyes kept returning to the folder. Every time she passed it, she thought about the numbers and the possible mistake. She remembered what her mother had told her years ago. Sometimes the smallest voice can speak the truth the loudest. Maria knew her mother had meant it in everyday life, but she felt it applied here too. She had noticed something wrong. Maybe it was her duty to say something. Richard Stone's assistant came into the office to arrange some files. Maria took a deep breath. "Excuse me," she said softly, careful not to seem disrespectful. "I think there is something wrong in this folder. Maybe you should check it again." The assistant looked surprised, then smiled politely. "Thank you, Maria," he said, "but I'm sure everything is fine. Mr. Stone will handle it." Maria nodded and returned to her cleaning. She felt a pang of doubt, wondering if she had overstepped. But she could not ignore the nagging feeling inside her. She had to do what she thought was right, even if no one believed her. As the morning passed, Maria continued her work. She polished the coffee table, straightened the books, and arranged pens and paper in perfect order. She watched the office staff come and go, their lives so different from hers. They were dressed in suits, talking on phones, making decisions that affected millions of people. Maria felt a strange mix of awe and humility. She had never been in a room like this before, and she wondered if she would ever be trusted to do more than clean it. Yet she knew something. Even in this world of money and power, honesty mattered. Attention to detail mattered. And sometimes, people needed someone to notice the small things, someone who did not get distracted by pride or ambition. Maria had always been that person in her own quiet way. By lunchtime, Maria had finished her cleaning. She packed her supplies, careful not to disturb anything. Before leaving, she glanced once more at the folder on the desk. Her hand lingered on it for a moment, and she whispered to herself, "I hope they check it. It feels important." She walked down the elevator, thinking about her children and how she would tell them about her day. Not about the cleaning, but about noticing, about courage, and about doing the right thing, even when no one asks you to. Maria knew that sometimes, small actions could make a big difference. She had no idea that this day, an ordinary Tuesday, would be remembered for the rest of her life. Outside, the sunlight was warmer now, and the streets were busier. People hurried past, some smiling, some frowning, some lost in thought. Maria carried her cleaning bag on her shoulder, walking slowly, observing, noticing. She knew that life was made of little moments like this, moments when you could choose to do the right thing, even if it was hard, even if no one else cared. And she knew, deep inside, that she had done the right thing that morning. Maria returned the next morning, carrying her cleaning supplies as usual. The office felt different today. Perhaps it was because she had spent the previous day noticing the folder on Richard Stone's desk. She could not stop thinking about the numbers, the tiny misalignment of papers, and the feeling that something important was being overlooked. Most days, she cleaned without giving much thought to the people who worked there, but today her mind kept wandering back to that folder. As she entered the office, the usual sounds greeted her, the faint hum of computers, the distant murmur of voices from other rooms, and the occasional ringing of phones. She started her routine, dusting shelves, wiping tables, and organizing office supplies. Her eyes kept drifting to the corner of the desk where the folder had been left, but it was not there this morning. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it taken? Had someone noticed it? She felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that maybe the problem had been solved, and disappointment because she still did not know if her observation would make a difference. While Maria cleaned, she overheard staff members talking quietly in the hallway. Words like mistake, documents, and urgent floated to her ears. She tried not to listen too closely, but her curiosity grew. She had spent so many years noticing small details in her work, and now it seemed like those details might matter more than ever. Her hands moved automatically, dusting and wiping, but her mind was alert, trying to catch every little sign that something unusual was happening. Richard Stone arrived shortly after she began. He was a tall man with a calm, confident presence. Maria had seen him on TV many times, reading about his wealth, his businesses, and his reputation for being both brilliant and cautious. Today, he seemed different. There was a slight tension in his shoulders, a small crease between his eyes. He spoke to his assistant in short, sharp sentences and gestured toward the desk where the folder had been. Maria paused for a moment, pretending to adjust the chairs, but she was listening carefully. The assistant returned to Maria's line of sight. This time, he carried the folder in his hands. Maria's curiosity piqued. She could not read the documents from where she stood, but she noticed the careful way he handled the papers. There was seriousness in the way he moved, a weight that told Maria that this was more than an ordinary folder. Her mind raced with questions. Had her observation yesterday caused them to recheck the documents? Could it really be important? Maria continued cleaning, but her thoughts were tangled in worry and excitement. She was not used to feeling so involved in someone else's business, especially someone as powerful as Richard Stone. Yet, a small part of her felt proud. She had spoken up yesterday, even though she was unsure. She had trusted her instincts, and now it seemed like those instincts might be right. At mid-morning, Richard Stone approached her. Maria froze, unsure if he wanted to speak to her about her work or something else. He stopped in front of her and smiled, a calm but focused smile. "Maria," he said, "could you come here for a moment?" Maria nodded and followed him to the side of the office, careful not to bump into any furniture or disrupt the arrangement of the room. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her composure. She had spent so many years working quietly, noticing details and making small improvements without recognition. She was used to being overlooked, but now she felt like something big was happening. Richard handed her the folder. "Yesterday, you mentioned something about these papers," he said. "I thought you might be mistaken, but my assistant decided to take another look just to be safe. Would you mind explaining what you noticed?" Maria blinked, surprised. She had expected to be ignored, not asked to explain herself. She took a deep breath. I don't know much about numbers or business," she began softly, "but I noticed that one page was different from the others. The numbers didn't seem to match, and the page was out of order. It looked wrong. I thought maybe someone should check it." Richard studied her closely. His expression was thoughtful, almost impressed. Maria felt her stomach tighten. She had never imagined that a cleaning lady's observation could carry weight in such a powerful office. But she said what she saw, and it was honest. She felt a small spark of courage inside her, the kind that comes from speaking the truth even when it feels uncomfortable. The assistant, who had been standing quietly nearby, nodded. "She's right," he said. "We rechecked the documents, and there is a discrepancy. It could have caused serious problems if it had gone unnoticed." Maria could not believe her ears. She had only meant to point out something unusual, not to become part of the business world or influence decisions worth millions of dollars. But the acknowledgement made her feel a deep sense of responsibility. She realized that noticing details and speaking up could have consequences far greater than she had imagined. Richard smiled at her again. "Maria," he said, "thank you for paying attention. You may not understand the full impact of what you saw, but you prevented a major mistake." Maria felt a mix of pride and humility. She had never thought of herself as someone who could affect the outcome of important decisions. She had always believed her role was small, her voice quiet. Yet today, her quiet observation had made a difference. After the conversation, Maria returned to her cleaning duties. She moved carefully, aware that her actions might be watched more closely now. But she did not feel anxious. She felt respected in a way she had never experienced before. She noticed small details with even more care, arranging papers, dusting corners, and polishing surfaces with precision. Her work felt meaningful in a new way. Throughout the rest of the day, Maria observed the office with a heightened sense of awareness. Meetings were happening in the conference rooms, staff members were busy reviewing reports, and Richard moved between offices, speaking quietly into his phone. She noticed the tension in the room, the concentration on faces, the small gestures of concern. Every detail seemed connected, every movement significant. Maria felt like she was seeing the world of business from the inside, even though she was still a cleaning lady. During her lunch break, she sat in a quiet corner, thinking about what had happened. She wondered if her life would change after this, or if things would go back to normal. She did not crave attention or praise, but she felt a new awareness of her own value. Her actions, small as they seemed, had mattered in a way she had never experienced before. Maria's thoughts turned to her children. She imagined telling Sophia and Daniel about the day, not in terms of money or power, but in terms of courage and honesty. She wanted them to understand that noticing small things, speaking the truth, and paying attention could make a difference. She wanted them to know that even someone who cleans offices and earns little money can have an impact that reaches far beyond what they imagine. The afternoon passed quickly. Maria continued her work, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. She noticed the polished floors reflected her image as she moved, the books arranged neatly on shelves, and the folders aligned perfectly. Every detail mattered, and she took pride in her careful work. For the first time, she felt that her ordinary life had extraordinary meaning. As the day came to an end, Maria packed her cleaning supplies. She glanced once more at Richard Stone, who was deep in conversation with his assistant. She felt a sense of connection, not because of his wealth or status, but because honesty and attention had created a bridge between them. Maria realized that life sometimes offers moments that reveal one's value in unexpected ways. She had spoken up, followed her instincts, and her actions had mattered more than she could have imagined. Walking home through the busy streets, Maria felt the sunlight warming her face. She thought about the ordinary moments that had led her here, noticing fingerprints on glass, arranging papers carefully, and trusting her instincts. She realized that life was full of small opportunities to do the right thing. Some went unnoticed, but some, like today, could change everything. That evening, Maria sat with her children and told them about her day. She spoke not of money or power, but of honesty, courage, and paying attention to details. Sophia and Daniel listened with wide eyes, proud of their mother's quiet strength. Maria smiled, feeling content. She knew that life was not measured only in wealth, but in integrity, attention, and the small actions that build character. And as Maria lay down to sleep that night, she reflected on the events of the day. She realized that her instincts, her careful observation, and her courage had set in motion something far bigger than she had ever imagined. She did not yet know the full extent of the impact, but she understood that her small actions could ripple outward in ways that mattered. For Maria, the ordinary had become extraordinary, and she knew, deep in her heart, that honesty, courage, and attention to detail were gifts she would carry with her, no matter what the future held. The next morning, Maria woke before sunrise as usual. The streets were quiet, with only a few early risers walking briskly to their jobs. She kissed her children on the forehead and whispered a promise to make the day special. Today felt different. She did not yet know how, but she had a sense that something important was about to happen. At the office, the atmosphere was tense. Maria noticed it immediately as she walked through the glass doors. Staff members moved quickly, speaking in low voices, and papers seemed to be shuffled with urgency. Normally, the office hummed with calm efficiency, but today the air was thick with anticipation. Maria's heart beat a little faster. She had never been in a place so serious before, and she felt both nervous and strangely excited. She began her cleaning as usual, but her mind could not focus on dusting or polishing surfaces. Her thoughts kept returning to the folder she had noticed days earlier. She remembered the numbers, the slight misalignment of pages, and the way something had felt off. Even though she did not fully understand finance, her instincts told her that it was important. She moved quietly, careful not to disturb anyone, but watching carefully for any sign of what might be happening. A few minutes later, Richard Stone entered the office. His expression was serious, and his usual calm demeanor seemed slightly strained. Maria paused mid-step, holding the duster in her hand. She watched as he called his assistant over and pointed toward the desk where the folder had been. They spoke in low tones, glancing at papers and shaking their heads. Maria could not hear their words clearly, but she sensed that something significant had been discovered. She continued cleaning, but she felt a growing urge to speak up. Her instincts had been right before, and she could not ignore them now. She wiped the desk, adjusted the chairs, and took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the folder. It was the same folder she had noticed, and now it seemed to hold even greater importance. Maria's heart raced. She had to decide, should she speak or stay silent like she usually did? Her mind raced with doubts. Who was she to point out a mistake in a billionaire's office? What if she was wrong? What if she embarrassed herself or angered someone powerful? Maria's hands hovered over the folder as she wrestled with her fears, but she remembered what her mother had told her long ago. Even a small voice can make a big difference when it speaks the truth. Maria realized that this was one of those moments. She could not ignore it. Summoning all her courage, she walked over to Richard Stone, who was still discussing the documents with his assistant. "Excuse me," Maria said softly. I think there is a mistake in these papers. I noticed it yesterday too. Maybe you should check them carefully." Richard turned to look at her, his expression unreadable at first. Maria felt her stomach twist with nervousness. She expected him to dismiss her, to say that she did not understand. But instead, he studied her carefully, as if measuring the weight of her words. "Can you show me what you mean?" he asked quietly. Maria nodded and gently laid the folder on the edge of the desk. She pointed to the page that had caught her attention. "This page, the numbers here don't seem to match the others." "I'm not sure, but it looked wrong to me," she said. Her voice was steady now, even though her hands shook slightly. Richard picked up the page and glanced at it. His assistant came closer, reviewing the numbers with careful attention. Maria watched silently, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. She could feel the tension in the room. It was as if the air itself had changed. The staff members who had been working nearby were now quietly observing, sensing that something unusual was happening. Minutes passed. Maria felt like hours had gone by. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly as he compared the numbers. Then he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "You're right," he said finally. "This is a significant error. If it had gone unnoticed, it could have caused a major problem." Maria could not believe what she heard. She had only pointed out something small, something she had noticed with her careful observation, and it had turned out to be extremely important. She felt a rush of relief and pride, but also a deep humility. She had never sought recognition or reward. She had only done what she believed was right. Richard's assistant looked at her with admiration. "Maria, you may not realize it, but you've prevented a huge mistake," he said. Maria shook her head, feeling shy. I just noticed it," she said softly. "I didn't know it was that serious." Richard smiled, a small, thoughtful smile. "It may not seem like much to you, but your attention to detail and honesty just saved millions. That is something very rare." Maria felt a mixture of emotions she had never experienced before: pride, disbelief, and a quiet satisfaction. She had spent years working quietly, unnoticed, yet here she was, making a difference in a world she had never imagined she could touch. As the day went on, Maria continued her cleaning, but the energy in the office had changed. Staff members moved more carefully, Papers were handled with precision, and Richard Stone occasionally glanced at her with a look of respect. Maria could not help but notice the change in the way people treated her. She was still a cleaning lady, but now she was someone whose observation mattered. During her lunch break, Maria sat quietly in the break room, thinking about the events of the morning. She realized that courage was not about loud words or dramatic actions. It was about noticing what is right, speaking up even when it is uncomfortable, and trusting oneself. Maria had done that today, and the results had been extraordinary. Her thoughts turned to her children. She imagined telling Sophia and Daniel about what had happened. She wanted them to understand that their mother had not performed a heroic act in the usual sense, but she had acted with integrity. She wanted them to see that honesty, careful observation, and courage could create change in ways no one could predict. Maria returned to her work with renewed focus. She moved carefully, noticing small details in the office that she had overlooked before. She aligned chairs, straightened folders, and polished surfaces until they gleamed. Each action felt meaningful now, as if her attention to detail could shape more than just the cleanliness of the office. It could influence decisions, protect people, and prevent mistakes. By mid-afternoon, Richard Stone summoned Maria to his office again. Her heart pounded as she walked through the doors. He gestured for her to sit across from him at his large desk. "Maria," he said, "I want you to understand the impact of what you did. The error you noticed could have cost the company millions. Your honesty and attention prevented that. That is something remarkable." Maria listened quietly, humbled. She had never imagined that her simple act of noticing something wrong would have such a consequence. She felt a deep sense of pride, not for herself, but for the idea that doing the right thing, even in a small way, could make a huge difference. Richard continued, "I know you don't have formal training in finance or business, but what you have is rare: intuition, honesty, and attention to detail. These qualities are more valuable than you realize." Maria smiled softly, her eyes shining. She had always believed that hard work and honesty mattered, even in her small, quiet world. Now she understood that those qualities could ripple outward, affecting people and decisions far beyond what she imagined. As the day ended, Maria packed her cleaning supplies with care. She glanced once more at Richard Stone, who was deep in conversation with his assistant. She felt a quiet connection, not because of his wealth or power, but because honesty and attention had created a bridge between them. Maria realized that life sometimes offered moments that revealed one's value in unexpected ways. Walking home through the bustling streets, Maria reflected on the day. She thought about how courage and honesty had shaped events, how noticing details could prevent problems, and how small actions could have big consequences. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her instincts and careful observation had made a real difference. That evening, Maria sat with her children, sharing the story of her day. She spoke not of money or fame, but of integrity, courage, and the importance of noticing details. Sophia and Daniel listened intently, proud of their mother's quiet strength. Maria smiled, feeling content. She knew that life was measured not just in wealth or status, but in the integrity, courage, and careful observation that guided one's actions. As she lay down to sleep, Maria reflected on the events of the day. She realized that her small act of speaking up had set in motion something far bigger than she could have imagined. She did not yet know the full outcome, but she understood that honesty, courage, and attention to detail could change lives in ways that mattered. Maria drifted to sleep with a sense of calm pride, knowing that her ordinary life had become extraordinary, not because of wealth or recognition, but because she had done the right thing at the right time. And in that moment, she understood that her voice, quiet as it might be, had the power to make a difference. The next morning, Maria arrived at the office as usual, carrying her cleaning supplies and greeting the security guards with a polite smile. The streets were brighter than usual, with sunlight glinting off the cars parked along the road. Maria noticed the small details, the way a pigeon landed on the windowsill, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery nearby. But her mind was focused on the office. Yesterday had been extraordinary, and she felt a quiet tension in her chest. Something important was happening, and she did not know exactly what it was. As she walked through the glass doors of the office, Maria immediately noticed the difference in energy. The staff moved with purpose and urgency, talking quietly in clusters and glancing frequently at their phones or computers. Even the usually calm Richard Stone seemed tense, walking briskly between desks, making notes, and speaking softly into his phone. Maria could feel the atmosphere shift, as if the office itself was aware that something critical had occurred. She began her cleaning routine, but it was difficult to focus. Every sound, every movement caught her attention. She wiped down desks, dusted shelves, and arranged papers, all while trying to stay unnoticed. But she could not ignore the fact that the folder she had pointed out had caused a ripple effect throughout the office. Everyone seemed to be aware of its importance, and Maria felt both nervous and curious. Mid-morning, Richard Stone called Maria into his office. Her heart pounded as she walked through the doors. This time, there was a serious expression on his face, and the atmosphere was different from before. He gestured for her to sit across from him at the large, polished desk. Maria took a deep breath and sat down, feeling the weight of the moment. "Maria," Richard began, his voice calm but serious, "I want to explain what happened after you pointed out that folder. We reviewed the documents carefully, and it turns out there was a very serious error, one that could have cost the company $500 million. Maria's eyes widened in disbelief. She had only noticed a small inconsistency, a page slightly out of order, and now she was hearing that it could have caused a loss of $500 million. Her mind struggled to comprehend the scale of the situation. She felt a mixture of shock, awe, and humility. She had never imagined that her quiet observation could have such a monumental impact. Richard continued, "The error was hidden among multiple layers of documents. It was subtle, something most people would have overlooked, even highly trained accountants and lawyers. But you noticed it. Your attention to detail and honesty prevented a loss that could have changed the company and affected thousands of employees and investors." Maria felt a lump in her throat. She had always believed that her work was small, that her voice was quiet, and that her role in the world was limited. But now she realized that her careful observation and courage had saved an enormous amount of money, and perhaps even the livelihoods of countless people. She did not feel pride in the usual sense. It was a quiet, deep satisfaction, the knowledge that doing the right thing mattered more than she had ever known. Richard's assistant came in and handed him a report. He glanced at it briefly before speaking again. "We traced the error back to a miscalculation in a merger deal," Richard explained. "If it had gone unnoticed, it could have cost the company $500 million, perhaps even more when considering the ripple effects. The error was small in appearance but enormous in consequence." Maria listened quietly, feeling the weight of the situation. She realized that her small action, speaking up about something she noticed, had prevented a disaster of unimaginable proportions. She had acted with honesty and integrity, not knowing the stakes, and her instincts had been correct. Richard looked at her thoughtfully. "Maria, I know you did not do this for recognition or reward. You did it because you noticed something was wrong. That quality is rare and valuable. I want you to understand that your actions made a real difference, and the company is grateful." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she absorbed his words. She had never expected anything like this. She had always worked quietly, focusing on her cleaning, her children, and the small details of daily life. She had never imagined that one small observation could lead to preventing a loss of $500 million. It was overwhelming, and yet, in a strange way, it felt natural. She had always believed in doing the right thing, and now she saw the power of that belief. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Maria continued her work, but the office felt different. People glanced at her with a new level of respect. Some smiled politely, others nodded in acknowledgement. Even Richard Stone moved past her desk several times, giving her small, appreciative glances. Maria felt a quiet sense of pride and humility. She was still a cleaning lady, but she had done something extraordinary without even realizing it. During her lunch break, Maria sat quietly in the break room, reflecting on the events of the morning. She thought about her children, about the lessons she had always tried to teach them: honesty, integrity, courage, and attention to detail. She realized that those lessons had guided her today, helping her notice something important and act on it. She felt grateful for the values her mother had instilled in her, and for the experiences that had shaped her careful, observant nature. Maria also thought about the responsibility she now carried. She realized that even small actions could have large consequences, and that paying attention, speaking up, and trusting one's instincts were more important than ever. She felt a deep sense of purpose, understanding that her work, though humble, had a significance she had never imagined. In the afternoon, Richard Stone called an urgent meeting with his team. Maria continued her cleaning nearby, listening carefully as the staff discussed the error and its potential consequences. She could hear the relief in their voices, the appreciation for catching the mistake before it caused a loss. Maria felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her observation had set this chain of events in motion. After the meeting, Richard approached Maria once more. "I want you to understand," he said, "that what you did goes beyond simply noticing an error. You demonstrated courage and integrity. The company owes you a debt of gratitude. You have saved $500 million without even realizing it." Maria shook her head, feeling overwhelmed. She had never considered herself capable of influencing events on such a scale. She had only followed her instincts and done what felt right. The thought that she had prevented a disaster of this magnitude filled her with a deep, quiet awe. As the day drew to a close, Maria packed her cleaning supplies and prepared to leave. She glanced one last time at Richard Stone, who was speaking quietly with his assistant. She felt a connection, not because of his wealth or influence, but because honesty and attention had created a bridge between them. Maria realized that life sometimes offered moments that revealed one's true value in unexpected ways. Walking home through the busy streets, Maria reflected on the extraordinary events of the day. She thought about how small actions could have enormous consequences, how courage and honesty could change lives, and how paying attention to details mattered more than she had ever imagined. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for recognition or reward, but for the opportunity to do the right thing and make a real difference. That evening, Maria sat with her children and told them the story of her day. She did not mention the $500 million directly, but she spoke about the importance of honesty, courage, and paying attention to details. Sophia and Daniel listened intently, proud of their mother's quiet strength and integrity. Maria smiled, feeling content. She knew that life was measured not just in wealth or status, but in the choices we make, the courage we show, and the attention we give to the world around us. Before going to sleep, Maria reflected once more on the events of the day. She realized that her small act of noticing an error and speaking up had prevented a disaster of unimaginable scale. She felt a quiet pride in her honesty, her attention to detail, and her courage. She understood that even ordinary people, living ordinary lives, could make extraordinary contributions when they trusted their instincts and did what was right. Maria drifted to sleep that night with a sense of calm and fulfillment. She had experienced something she would never forget, a moment when honesty, courage, and careful observation had changed the course of events in a way she had never imagined. She knew that her life, though still humble, had been touched by extraordinary circumstances, and that she had played a vital role without ever seeking recognition or reward. And in that quiet moment, Maria understood something profound. The world needed people like her, people who noticed the small things, acted with integrity, and spoke the truth, even when it seemed difficult or unimportant. Her ordinary life had become extraordinary, not because of wealth or fame, but because she had done what was right at the right time. The morning sunlight streamed into Maria's small apartment as she prepared for another day at work. But today, she felt different. Something had shifted in her life over the past few days, and she carried a quiet excitement with her as she kissed her children goodbye. Sophia and Daniel noticed their mother's unusual energy. "Are you feeling okay, Mama?" Sophia asked, curious. Maria smiled warmly and ruffled her daughter's hair. "I'm fine, my dear. Just a busy day ahead," she said, choosing her words carefully. At the office, Maria felt the change immediately. Staff members greeted her with smiles and polite nods. Even the security guards seemed to hold a hint of respect that had not been there before. Maria had always known her role in the office was small, but now she felt the weight of something greater. Her quiet observation and courage had prevented a huge mistake, and it was clear that people were beginning to notice. Richard Stone arrived early as usual, and Maria watched him move through the office with calm authority. But today, he stopped by her desk, smiling. "Maria," he said, "I want to speak with you before the day begins. Can you come to my office for a moment?" Maria nodded, feeling her heart beat a little faster. She carried her cleaning supplies and followed him through the large office, her mind racing with curiosity and a touch of nervousness. When she entered his office, Richard gestured for her to sit across from him. He looked at her with a warmth that surprised her. "Maria," he began, "I want to acknowledge what you've done. You may not realize it, but your attention to detail and honesty have made a huge difference, not just for the company, but for everyone involved in this project. You saved $500 million, and that is extraordinary." Maria felt a wave of disbelief. She had never imagined that her small act of noticing a detail could have such a monumental impact. I was just doing my job," she said softly. "I noticed something was wrong." "I didn't know it would be that serious," Richard smiled. "And that is exactly why it matters so much. You acted with integrity and honesty without thinking of reward or recognition. That is rare. Today, I want to make sure you are recognized for your contribution." He handed her a letter, carefully prepared. Maria opened it with trembling hands. It was an official acknowledgement from the company, praising her for her honesty, attention to detail, and courage. It also included a generous bonus, enough to make a significant difference in her life and the lives of her children. Maria's eyes filled with tears. She had never expected anything like this. As she left Richard's office, Maria felt a mix of pride, humility, and gratitude. She continued her cleaning duties, but now she moved with a new sense of purpose. Every action felt meaningful. Dusting a desk, arranging chairs, polishing surfaces. Each task mattered because she understood that even small actions could have big consequences. Throughout the day, her colleagues approached her quietly, offering smiles and words of appreciation. Maria felt a quiet joy in their acknowledgement, but she remained humble. She knew that her actions were not about recognition. They were about doing what was right. Yet she could not deny that it felt good to be seen and valued. During her lunch break, Maria sat in a quiet corner, reflecting on the changes in her life. She thought about her children and the lessons she wanted to teach them. Honesty, courage, and careful observation were values she had always tried to instill, and now she had an example to show them, her own experience. She realized that integrity and attention to detail were powerful tools, capable of shaping outcomes far beyond what one might imagine. When she returned home that evening, Maria's children noticed a difference in her demeanor. She sat down with them and shared the story of her week, not in terms of money or recognition, but in terms of honesty, courage, and the importance of paying attention to details. Sophia and Daniel listened intently, their eyes wide with admiration and pride. Maria smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment she had never known. Over the next few weeks, Maria's life began to change in small but meaningful ways. She was offered a permanent administrative assistant role at the office, a position that allowed her to use her careful observation and organizational skills in new ways. She was still humble, still hardworking, and still the same loving mother, but now she had opportunities she had never imagined. Her mornings were no longer only about cleaning. They were about observing, organizing, and contributing in ways that mattered. Her colleagues treated her with respect, not because of her position, but because of her integrity and the value of her insights. Maria felt a quiet pride in knowing that her actions, small as they seemed, had created trust and admiration. One afternoon, Richard Stone invited Maria to a company event, a gathering to celebrate recent achievements and milestones. She arrived feeling slightly nervous, unsure of how she would fit in among executives and business leaders. But Richard greeted her warmly and introduced her to several key staff members. "This is Maria," he said. "Her honesty and attention to detail saved the company $500 million. She is an example for all of us." Maria was humbled by the applause and recognition. She smiled politely, feeling a sense of pride without arrogance. She realized that she had always believed in doing the right thing, and now others could see the value in that belief. She understood that integrity and courage were qualities that transcended position, wealth, or status. As the evening progressed, Maria observed the room with a careful eye, noticing small details, the way people interacted, and the subtle signs of stress or excitement. She realized that her skills, attention, observation, and honesty were not just useful in cleaning or small tasks. They were valuable in understanding and navigating the world. She felt a quiet sense of empowerment, knowing that her abilities could shape outcomes in meaningful ways. When she returned home that night, Maria sat with her children and reflected on her journey. She realized that life had a way of presenting opportunities in unexpected ways. Sometimes the smallest actions, speaking up, noticing details, acting with honesty, could create ripples that reached far beyond what one might imagine. She wanted her children to understand that courage was not about loud words or dramatic gestures. It was about integrity, careful observation, and doing the right thing even when it seemed unnoticed. Days turned into weeks, and Maria continued to excel in her new role. She remained humble, approachable, and kind, never forgetting the lessons that had guided her through life. Her children saw her strength and integrity, and they grew to value those qualities in themselves. Maria's life had changed, not because of wealth or status, but because she had acted with honesty and courage when it mattered most. Richard Stone occasionally called her into his office to consult on documents or provide her insights. Her opinions were valued, not because of her position, but because of her careful observation, honesty, and integrity. Maria felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her skills, once unnoticed, were now appreciated and impactful. One evening, as Maria prepared dinner for her children, she thought about how far she had come. She remembered the small details, the fingerprints on the glass, the papers out of order, the instinct to speak up. Those details had led to extraordinary outcomes. She understood now that life often required courage in small moments, and that integrity could have consequences far greater than one might imagine. Sophia and Daniel listened as Maria shared her experiences, not focusing on wealth, but on lessons learned. "Mama," Daniel said, "I want to be like you. I want to notice things and help people even in small ways." Maria smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. She realized that her actions had not only changed her life, but had also inspired the next generation to value honesty, courage, and careful attention to detail. As the night grew quiet, Maria sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from her humble apartment to the office of a billionaire, from quiet observation to recognition and respect. She realized that her life had been shaped by values she had held dear all along: integrity, honesty, and the courage to act when something felt wrong. Maria understood that these qualities were more powerful than money, status, or recognition. They were the foundation of her character, the reason she had been able to prevent a disaster worth $500 million without even realizing it. She felt grateful for the opportunities that had come her way, not because she sought them, but because she had acted rightly and honestly in the moments that mattered. As she prepared for bed, Maria felt a sense of peace and purpose. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, small and large, but she was ready. She had learned that paying attention, acting with integrity, and speaking up when necessary could change lives, sometimes in ways that were unimaginable. Maria drifted to sleep that night with a quiet smile, knowing that her ordinary life had become extraordinary, not because of wealth or fame, but because she had done the right thing when it mattered most. She had saved a fortune without seeking reward, inspired her children, and shown that courage, honesty, and careful attention could shape the world in meaningful ways. And in that moment, Maria realized something profound. The world needed people like her, people who noticed the small details, acted with integrity, and spoke the truth, even when it seemed difficult or unnoticed. Her life had been forever changed, and she had changed the lives of others, simply by being honest, careful, and courageous.